All right, let's dive right into a really big topic, this idea of a future 7-year period of just global chaos. We're going to get specific and look at where that exact timeline even comes from.
You know, so many people have heard about a 7-year tribulation, but if you ask them where that number actually comes from in the scriptures, most of us would be stumped. So today, we're going to play detective. We're going to follow the thread, piece by piece, and see exactly how this timeline gets built.
So, our investigation really kicks off with one of the most well-known concepts in end times prophecy, the tribulation itself.
Now, according to the source material, this isn't just a random period of bad luck. It's seen as a future time with two very specific goals. First, the discipline of the nation of Israel, and second, the judgment of the world. And it's really important to note that within this view, the Christian church is, well, gone, believed to have been removed from earth before any of this starts.
And to get a sense of just how serious this is meant to be, just listen to this description from the book of Zephaniah. It's painted as a time of just unbelievable turmoil. We're talking divine judgments, massive natural disasters, plagues, the whole 9 yards.
And, this isn't just some isolated idea found in one dusty corner of the Bible. The concept pops up all over the place under a bunch of different names. Whether it's called the Day of the Lord or the Time of Jacob's Trouble, interpreters see these as all pointing to the exact same future event.
Okay, now pay close attention to that last part from the Gospel of Mark. Had the Lord not shortened those days, that little phrase is a huge clue. It implies that this period, as awful as it is, has a specific, limited length. Which, of course, brings us right back to our main question: why 7 years?
Well, the answer, or at least the one argued for in this interpretive model, is found in a really complex prophecy deep in the Old Testament book of Daniel.
And here it is. This is the bedrock text. The prophet Daniel gets this vision that says 77s have been set aside for your people, which is understood to mean the nation of Israel, to get a bunch of major redemptive things done. But what on earth is a 7?
So in this way of thinking, the 77s aren't weeks of days like our Monday through Sunday. They're understood as 70 weeks of years. So you do the math. 70 times 7 years gives us this grand prophetic timeline of 490 years.
But this is where it gets really interesting, kind of like a historical detective story, because that 490-year clock doesn't seem to tick down all at once. There's a pause, and that creates what some people have called the case of the missing week.
See, the prophecy says that from the time a decree is given to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah is cut off, exactly 69 of those weeks, or 483 years, would go by. Theologians who followed this view argue that cut off is a clear reference to the crucifixion of Jesus, and they claim this happened with pinpoint historical accuracy.
Let's just visualize this for a second. As you can see here, the prophetic clock starts ticking with that decree to rebuild Jerusalem. It runs for 483 years, which covers the first 69 weeks, and it stops right at the crucifixion. And then, the clock just stops. According to this interpretation, that stop creates this long gap that we're living in now, often called the church age. So here's the kicker. If 69 of the 70 weeks are in the past, that leaves 1 week, one 7-year period, still waiting on the prophetic calendar.
And there it is. That's the heart of the argument. That final leftover week from Daniel's prophecy is identified as the 7-year tribulation period we've been hunting for.
But we can go even deeper. The source material argues that other scriptures actually give us a play-by-play for what happens inside this final 7-year block. It seems this period gets split right down the middle.
The very same chapter in Daniel gives us our next clue. It talks about some future ruler, often identified as the Antichrist, who makes a deal or a treaty for 1/7. That's our 7 years. But here's the crucial part. In the middle of that 7, he breaks the deal. That action literally splits the 7-year period in two.
Okay, now check out how other prophecies seem to lock in with this idea. The book of Revelation talks about a period of 42 months. Daniel talks about a time, times, and half a time. And Revelation also mentions 1,260 days. Now those sound like totally different things, right? But interpreters point out that if you use a 360-day prophetic calendar, all of them, every single one, calculates out to the exact same length, 3.5 years, which is exactly half of our 7-year week.
So you have a treaty that holds for the first half of the week, just like Daniel 9 said. That's followed by a 42-month or 3.5-year period of chaos. You put the two halves together and boom, you get a complete 7-year period with a very clear midpoint.
So we've traced the how the number 7 is derived. But what about the why? I mean, what's the ultimate point of this whole 7-year period, according to this framework?
The source material really lays out a dual purpose. For the world at large, it's a time of final judgment. But for the nation of Israel, it's described more like a refining fire, a final, intense period of discipline designed to bring about their national restoration and ultimately turn them toward their Messiah.
So let's just do a quick recap of the logic here. The whole idea of a 7-year tribulation rests on Daniel's 70-week prophecy. 69 of those weeks are seen as done, finished, in the history books. That one leftover week is then interpreted as the future 7-year period, which is itself shown to be split into two 3.5-year halves, backed up by multiple cross-referenced scriptures. When you step back, what we've really looked at is a system of interpretation. It's like a giant, complex puzzle assembled from texts written thousands of years apart. It's a pretty fascinating example of connecting patterns to build a single, cohesive story. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. What does this incredibly intricate method of piecing together prophecy tell us about our own human search for order and meaning in sacred texts?